That cross railroad tracks. Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, March 1st, 2023, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street in Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I'm Mayor Shelby Ronstadt presiding. Also present are councilors Deb Rule, Andy Grote, Jason Welker, and Justin Dick. Councilwoman Kate McAllister and Councilman Joel Espiro are absent. If everyone will please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, are there any announcements from staff? Seeing none, are there any announcements from council?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So a couple, first, I want to thank the roads department for yesterday. I think it's official. We have had second winter, so we're getting closer to spring. They did an exceptional job moving the snow, and big congratulations to our ladies Sandpoint High School basketball team for taking state, as well as I went to lunch at Dub's today. It's nice to see them back in action. Mr. Mayor.
All right. Any other announcements? Okay. Quick announcement that we will not be taking public comment this evening on items 7A or 7B. A public hearing will be scheduled at which time the public will have the opportunity to provide testimony on sewer rates. We'll now proceed with the public forum portion of the meeting, which allows the public the opportunity to address the council and myself regarding items listed on the consent calendar or on any topic not listed on the agenda. If anyone here in chambers wishes to speak now during the public forum or during any other portion of the meeting, you must complete a sign-up form, which is located on the table by the front door, and hand it to the clerk up here in the front right of the room. If you're on Zoom and wish to speak during the general public forum, you'll need to raise your hand on Zoom at this time. Madam Clerk, does anyone wish to speak during the public forum?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. That concludes the public forum portion of the meeting this evening. We'll now proceed with the consent calendar. For the record, the total amount of bills is $586,358.18 for regular payables. Does council have any questions, or are there any items council wishes to remove from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion that the consent calendar be approved.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. I do want to call attention to the Planning and Zoning Commission appointment of Wayne Benner, who's with us here this evening. Thanks for being here with us, Wayne, and appreciate your willingness to serve. I'm confident he'll be an excellent member on the commission. He's already more than demonstrated his commitment to the work, as he's attended virtually every council and planning and zoning meeting over the last number of months. So really appreciate your engagement, Wayne, and I look forward to your confirmation. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Grote,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Rule.
Yes.
Consent calendar is approved. Next, under old business, the city's consultants from FCS Group will present the results of two key study components from the wastewater rate study. One is the cost of service analysis, and two is the rate design. Just a reminder that we will not be taking public comment this evening on item 7A or 7B, as the public hearing will be scheduled, at which time we'll hear public testimony on the proposed new and revised rates. I'll now yield the floor to Utilities Director Greg Lanning. Nice tie, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. Members of the council, I'm Greg Lanning, the Utilities Director, and last time I had Jennifer help me with getting this to move. I apologize. There it is. Now, that was a little bit of a teaser up there, and as a matter of fact, I'll put it back. I realize there was a consent item, and I know the clerk, she waved her finger at me and says, no, that's a consent item. But it turns into how could you pass up the Vulcan VKR 36? I mean,
Knuckle rake
knuckle rake,
bar screen.
knuckle break bar screen. I mean, how cool is that? And so just a couple seconds on it is all. These are some pictures, obviously, from now that we know it's Vulcan, and thank you, council, for awarding this bid. It'll take over a year to manufacture this equipment. This goes to the wastewater treatment plant. The water flows through a screen there. The drawing on there, the picture on the right shows that graded portion down below. That's where the water goes through. The middle one is the rake itself that actually rakes the material off of it and takes it to the very top of it and then deposits it, and then it's processed otherwise. But the knuckle part of that is this, and it's a big chain link. On that picture on the left shows these portions of the knuckle. And it's solid steel, and it's just really fun stuff for a piece of equipment that will be over 1.5 tons later, delivered over a year and a couple months later out at the wastewater treatment plant. So when the time comes.
And Greg, yeah, that's been sanitized. Thank you.
Only used twice.
So that council is the Vulcan, and now as we were talking earlier.
It's impressive to just do a quick Google and YouTube search of these new pieces of equipment that we just approved and how efficient and effective that's going to make our wastewater treatment plant.
Yes, absolutely. And I know Devin and his folks out there, I go out to the plant often, to look because it seems to me we're forever fixing stuff. And I know council, since I've been here, has talked about, the replacement of that. And it's been a major part of my life here at the city to figure out the finance and the details of getting that plant replaced. And so the sooner the better. But this new piece of equipment was considered a bridge piece of equipment, that the old one was in such bad shape that we needed to at least get this installed until the new plant is up and running. And then hopefully we can pull this one up and reuse it in the new plant as well. Tonight's water rate presentation is going to be very similar, or the wastewater utility rate design presentation is going to be very similar to the water one that we heard just last council meeting, and similar format in which we were 2 parts of the 4 parts through the system. We had already figured out revenue requirements and new user facility fees. This portion of the presentation is all about cost of service for the wastewater as well as the rate design. And I pulled out just of interest to me that I thought council might want to look for during the presentation that's a little over and above, kind of unique as we go through this presentation tonight, that struck me that good items to take a look at. This is a similar slide to last time. You might remember we finished the revenue portion of that, and then we increased all rates across the board. These percentages in water and wastewater, 19% tonight for the sewer wastewater. This work tonight is work underneath that 19%, that cap that was, or that amount that we raised rates last year. This is the work of the cost of service and what the rates themselves look like themselves. So in water, we were looking at customer classes like single family, multifamily, irrigation, et cetera. We had quite a discussion on wholesale water rates, as a matter of fact. Wastewater is quite a bit different and unique. Its customer classes are different. You'll hear this tonight. We still have single and multifamily, but we just have 2 categories in commercial for wastewater, just by the different nature of how the systems work and what we look at. For instance, we don't have irrigation, which would apply to water and flow of water, versus sanitary sewer, which is pretty constant flow. You'll see, and I'll mention it here in the next slide. The costs then are contributed to different categories as well. So one similar for the customer and what it takes for the administration. But in wastewater, it's all about the amount of the water that comes down the system as well as the strength. And that's it's measured in a couple of ways. It can be biological, oxygen demand, or it can be TSS, the amount of solids. Those are the two major categories. And those line up exactly with our discharge permit to the lake. The permit that we get from the DEQ for discharge requirements. So we're measuring BOD and TSS down at the plant. So that then goes back upstream and the costs then are allocated in wastewater in that manner. And so you can kind of see fundamentally how we work differently. And then also, I would imagine Angie will speak to this. It's a different standard which we apply here. It's the Water Environment Federation Financing and Charges. By the way, Angie consults or sits on both of these boards. Water was the American Water Works Association that determines the methodology in which we model these. Sewer is a different organization that looks or consults to the water or the rate study guidelines, excuse me. And this slide you'll look for as well, I hope. This is what cost of service is all about. It determines if these customer classes are being treated equally as we distribute those costs back to those cost centers. And if not, how do you adjust those? And so that's what you'll be hearing tonight.
Greg, I just want to point out on that slide, it's a pretty marked difference from what we saw with water rates. And how do we get so far off with this?
Oh, excellent. And I'm sure Angie will put that in her pocket and she will speak to that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll just hold my breath on that one.
Part of the answer is we haven't raised rates since a 2010 study, so quite a few things have changed in 12 years or so since the last rate study was implemented. And with that, I'll introduce Angie, and then I think Brooke is going to join us online as well. And I can stop sharing as well.
Okay, there we go. Success. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. It's good to be back before you. Again, we were here, gosh, probably I think 2 weeks ago, so it hasn't been too long of a time that we were talking about the water utility cost of service and rate design. So tonight, really our focus will be on that wastewater, really completing the last two components of the comprehensive rate study process, which Mr. Lanning had mentioned is cost of service, equity evaluation, and then rate design. How do we actually collect the appropriate target level of revenue from our customer classes? And so that will be the main focus of this evening. We'll start with a quick background to just kind of say, where have we been up to this particular point? We had been completing the water and wastewater studies in tandem with each other. And so last year we did focus on the revenue requirement and the new user facilities fees, which were presented about June 8th. Council looked at the financial plan that was developed for the 2023 through the 2028 time period and approved on October 1st, really the 2023 rates with that 19% increase. And again, you will be looking at that rate plan and those particular rate adjustments annually and making decisions in the future. So this evening's discussions will be over that 19% that has already been approved. As was mentioned previously, these are really completing the last two phases of the comprehensive rate study process. So cost of service, again, once we're looking at how much is the total pie that we need in order to complete our sewer utilities and meet our sewer utility obligations, how does that then become getting sliced to our customer classes in terms of equitable allocation and who should be paying what in terms of those total costs? And then finally, rate design. Once we know how much we should be collecting from each customer class, how do we actually collect that? And as well as meeting our objectives for that rate design process. When we discuss cost of service, Mr. Lanning had mentioned that, there are industry standard methodologies and industry practices, and the wastewater is essentially looking at the Water Environment Federation for that particular methodology and practice. What we are trying to do with the cost of service, again, is to determine an equitable share of cost to provide service to each of your customer groups. And those customer groups are going to be categorized together depending on how they receive service, what kind of facilities they need, how do they actually contribute flow, how much flow, do they have higher strengths than another class, which might make various different costs higher for that particular class. So it really is quite data intensive when we get to the cost of service process, really looking at your specific utility, your system, and your customers to determine, really how do they use, what do they demand when they're asking us to provide sewer service, and what do we need to provide in order to safely remove that wastewater from their either business or home. I provided a quick table there just to give you a quick glimpse of what your customer classes look like. And so you can see the majority of your customers are single family, about 61%, about almost 3,000 customers, followed by your multifamily class, as well as then commercial 1 and 2. But again, the majority of your customers are in that single family category in terms of accounts. And so when we look through, the ultimate idea of the cost of service is, again, trying to identify, are there cost differences that exist between serving different customer classes, between your customer groups? For the actual process, this graphic probably looks familiar from the water one, but the cost pools or the functions of service are slightly different. Right now, what we're looking at is trying to take your customer costs and identify and place them into each of those cost buckets there. So what is related to customers, serving the amount of customers that you have on the system? How do we determine flow? How much, who and how much is being contributed by each of your customer classes? And then finally, strength, is it domestic type strength that is being contributed, or are there higher strengths based on the type of customer that you have? These will definitely provide the differential in terms of why one class might be higher than another class in terms of ultimate cost allocation. Once we get those costs into your cost pools, we then develop specific city-specific allocation factors and baseline. And so again, if I'm putting $1 in the customer bucket, how do I then begin to allocate those costs in the customer bucket among your customer classes? And we'll talk a little bit about that and how we do that. But we do develop allocation factors for each of those functional cost pools, which ultimately gets us to that third step, which is getting the dollars in terms of cost of service for each of your customer groups: single family, multifamily, commercial 1, and commercial 2. From that very detailed allocation process, the summary in terms of our costs and how the actual result of them is in this particular slide 8, which we call step 1, allocating utility costs to cost pool. So we're taking your budget, identifying really what are the cost drivers for each of those, budget line items, and where do we place them in terms of what function is it actually providing, and who is actually driving those particular costs. And so what you can see here is the majority of your costs are strictly related to flow. It's just amount of how much flow are we having to process and collect in terms of the sewer utility. There are still costs related to strength. So you can see there the biochemical oxygen demand, BOD, is 6%, and total suspended solids 10%. So combined strength is about 16%, but the majority of your costs are related to flow. And so it's going to really come down to how much flow is each of your customer classes contributing. A little bit, about 5% to customer. And you can see there the definitions of what each of those cost pools mean. Once we have those cost pools, slide 9 is how we ultimately start allocating cost among your customer classes. And so again, if we are putting $1 in your flow bucket for single family, 42 cents of every dollar is going to go to their single family class because they're 42% of the flow. If I put something in the customer or the account bucket, 61 cents is going to go to your single family class because they represent 61% of your accounts. And again, similarly for strength, you can see there that single family through commercial 1 is really domestic type strength. It's only until you get to commercial 2 that you have a slightly higher strength factor that begins to differentiate the costs associated with the strength component and the cost pools to strength when we're distributing those costs to your customer classes. But this is fairly significant as this is the basis for how we begin to distribute each of those costs to your customer classes, those cost pools. When we get to step 3, combining all of, allocating our allocating our cost to our cost pools, establishing our allocation factors and distributing those costs to our customer classes, the result is here that you see on slide 10, which is a summary of the cost of service. Now, again, cost of service is a snapshot of a point in time. And so again, if I took our snapshot today versus if I took it 3 years ago or 3 years in the future, we might look different, than the snapshot today. So this is what our snapshot looks like today. We do provide a range of reasonableness because we know that costs kind of change and flow year over year. And so that range that you see here with the dashed lines is that 5% plus or minus 5% over the average. We're trying to get to kind of that 100%, but we know that our costs can shift up to that point and still be within what we call cost of service. What you can see as the results here is that it appears that the residential and multifamily class are paying above their cost of service, and the commercial classes are paying below their cost of service. And so that's ultimately what is coming down to in terms of the summary of the cost of service. And that again is taking into account how many customers you have, how much flow is being contributed by those customer classes, as you kind of saw in the last slide, as well as what type of strength. If we place something in the strength costs, how is that being distributed? And you can see that the commercial classes, especially commercial 2, actually has higher strength. And so they're going to get a higher allocation of those costs. Okay. So when we have results like this, and it has been sometimes in terms of cost of service, and usually always we want to recommend a phased in approach. So not necessarily going there all at once, because again, we know things can change. And so how do we ultimately get these customer classes within that range of reasonableness without having too great of an impact on any individual class? Slide 11 is the proposed cost of service phase-in. This particular table, again, working from left to the right, we see our customer classes listed on the left-hand side, single family through commercial 2. The first set of numbers is that 19% across the board that was implemented October 1. With the cost of service findings that you saw on the previous slide, we're still collecting that 19%. So it's ultimately revenue neutral. No, we're not collecting any more or any less than 19%. How it's being distributed amongst the customer classes is different. And so what the proposal is there based on the cost of service results is that instead of 19%, the single family would be slightly lower at 16.2, multifamily at 12%. And then in order to get those commercial class 1 and 2 up to, again, that closer to that range of reasonableness, we see that they're slightly higher at 25% and 30% respectively. That carries on over time, as you can see there through the other additional years of this particular phase and continues. That their single family and multifamily are slightly lower than the average. The commercial 1 and 2 are higher than the average. Again, trying to get to the range of reasonableness by the year 2028. So with that, now that we have the cost distributed to our customer classes, the next question becomes, well, how do we collect that target customer classes? With any rate design, we always want to make sure that we have various different rate design principles in mind, being, really aligning the fixed costs to the fixed revenue and the variable revenue to the extent possible. We want to generate the appropriate amount of revenue that we have identified as needing to fund the utility sufficiently for the long term, meet any goals and objectives that we might have. So administrative ease, understanding, revenue stability, things like that. And then we also want to keep an eye and be mindful of how we're impacting individual customer classes. With the wastewater sewer utility, there were also a number of different items that we wanted to look into, to recalibrate, and to get more into really what do our customer classes look like today. Again, it has been some time since the last rate study. And so we have listed a number of those particular rate design considerations that we looked into, and then we'll also continue talking about them on the previous slides in a little bit more detail. But just to summarize here, in terms of the residential class, we've looked into moving to a fixed rate for all residential customers. And so currently you have a fixed charge and a volume charge. We're looking at changing that to strictly just be a fixed charge per month. In order to get there over time, the proposal is that we begin with 2 flat fees for that residential class. So less than 2,000 gallons is 1 flat fee, over 2,000 gallons is another flat fee, ultimately working to having only 1 flat rate schedule, single family rate by the year 2028. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Multifamily, again, moving to a fixed rate per unit. rather than a fixed and a variable charge. So that's the other change there. Implement cost of service phase-in, so begin to phase in that cost of service. So residential and multifamily coming down slightly from the overall average, the commercial is going up from this overall average in order to get closer to that cost of service range. Eliminate the billed minimum usage, so similar to water, all classes here currently have that minimum charge, and so we want to eliminate the minimum charge and just go to a flat rate and a volume charge for some classes, or just a flat rate. And then we're looking at, based on the data that we looked at and digging into the commercial class 2, it looked like the majority of customers there are falling into the second tier, so about 92%. And so really the question was, do we really even need 2 tiers? And so based on the data and the information that we had, it looked like it could go to a flat rate rather than having 2 tiers to simplify that process. And again, we'll talk.
So commercial one would be the only one that does not have a flat rate?
Yeah, and really, we would have liked to do that, but we saw the impacts, and so we'd like to just kind of address that in the future, once maybe the rate increases are a little bit lower. So right now you're at 19%. Maybe if you get to the 3%, you can start re-looking at that and trying to get that to a flat. In terms of the existing rates, and so again, this is just more for comparison to what you're doing currently today with your rates. You have a monthly fixed charge, and that is per single family account as well as commercial class account. And then it's charged per unit for the multifamily class. On the variable charges, everyone has a flow rate. So single family and multifamily customers pay a flat rate for all usage, that $11.36 per 1,000 gallons. But you can see there that the commercial class 1 and 2 actually have a 2-tier rate structure, 0 to 6,000 gallons and then over 6,000 gallons. And so that's what you currently have today. When we look at the proposed rate changes for the single family or residential class, again, what we're looking at here is to first move to having 2 flat rates. And so from the single family per account $34.94, we would go to 2 flat rates of $57. And I think this thing is in my way here, so I can't see it. $57.66. And then over 2,000 gallons per month is $75.63. You can see that we've dropped the flow charge. So there's no longer that $11.36 flow charge. Where we have set the less than 2,000 gallons, as you can see there under the first table on your left-hand side, is equal to the current minimum bill that customers have now. So right now, under your existing rate structure, regardless, customers have a minimum bill of $57.66. We've maintained that, so there's no rate change in terms of that low tier for your sewer utility. What happens, however, is that over 2,000 would then take up the difference. So we have a target level of revenue. We've set one set at the $57.66. That means the over then makes up the difference to make sure that we're collecting the full revenue for that class. Kind of just solving.
Yeah, quick question, Angie. What percentage of households or single family customers currently use more than 2,000 gallons? Do we know that? Like how many of our?
Say about 20% are under the 2,000 at this point.
Do we have any data on whether that 20% is unoccupied houses?
That is definitely part of
Good question.
that's exactly part of why we talked about going to this, because well, this all factors into what we used to do is do a I don't know if I want to talk about this now.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
We used to do a winter averaging, and we would take the rates during the 3 months of the winter time where a lot of houses are unoccupied. I should say secondary homes are unoccupied during that time. And that's what their rate was based on. So this is actually trying to capture some of that, of those houses that were getting charged for their non-winter usage, but they were here in the summertime per se. So that was one of the main considerations of why we wanted to move to this.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Mhm.
So currently the fixed charge is $34.94 and then $11.36 per 1,000 gallons. So to get to the minimum, but the minimum billed amount is $57.66, correct?
Correct.
So you're basically getting your first 2,000 plus gallons free, so to speak, currently.
We like to call it an allowance.
Okay. Beyond that, you're going to pay another $11.36 per 1,000 gallons above the $57.66. So presumably most occupied houses are paying close to $75 a month now. Is that safe to say? we're, in other words, I'm thinking out loud here, but the proposed change is the flat fixed charge will be 57.66. Eliminate the fixed charge. And you get, okay, there's really very little change proposed when we think of it that way. I mean, in terms of what people are actually going to pay.
Sure.
Okay.
And we have a bill comparison in the next couple slides to kind of show what currently at your existing rate, what are you paying? And then what are you paying at the proposed rate, if that helps out.
2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, last time we were here doing the water presentation, there was some discussion. Councilwoman Rule asked about conservation incentives. Are there any new conservation incentives built into this? I mean, I don't know how important is it to conserve wastewater? Is this something that we're concerned about at the city? Do we want to send signals to households to flush the toilet less? Or is that, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
When we talk about conservation, are we worried about, we've heard so many presentations from Greg about inflow and infiltration and these things. It seems like stormwater might be the biggest concern when it comes to the capacity of our sewer treatment plant. Is it important? Is this even a consideration when setting rates? Is a conservation value? Is that something we should be thinking about in your presentation today?
I think it comes down to the community, and if conservation is something that is key, and most volume charges absolutely are going to give you more of a price signal than a flat charge. However, that is balanced out with revenue stability, right? So you're going to be taking on some debt with your wastewater treatment plant, that you need some revenue stability. And so that also comes into play, as well as what Sarah had just mentioned. You are a resort summertime community. Are we collecting an appropriate amount of revenue in the sewer rate because of winter water averaging, that that we're not equitably collecting that from full-time residents versus part-time residents? And so we got to be a little, mindful again of that, how each of these rate structures that we're developing actually play in practice and in reality. So in theory, this conservation rate structure in terms of a volume charge, et cetera, is great. That's kind of really what you want. But in terms of a community that you have, it's difficult because of that average winter water, which is the most equitable. You're really trying to figure out indoor use that's not contributing to the sewer system. So average winter water use is the way to go. But when you have a disparity between full-time residents and then the residents that are here part-time, are you collecting the appropriate amount, equitable amount from them as well, using the average winter water when they're not here? That makes sense. It gets a little messy, right? And convoluted.
Now that I as you were speaking, I realized that I was wrong, actually. So the proposed change here is fixed charge goes up to 57.66, but knowing that most occupied households are using more than 2,000 gallons, that most households are immediately going to see their rates, their minimum fixed charge jump up to 75.63. Is that correct?
It's good. If they're over 2,000, it will be 75.63 flat, but it really depends on what they were using before. So they can, again, I think the bill comparison will kind of show you from a low user to a high user, what that could look like. We are also recommending cost of service changes. So it's below the 19% that we had originally had with that October 1st implementation. It's actually more like 16%. So they're getting a little bit more of a break in terms of the single family impact with that as well.
So just to summarize, and correct me if I'm wrong here, under the previous structure with the fixed charge of 34.94 to get to 75.63 would have required approximately 4,000 gallons of usage. Is that correct? Because if we look at 11.36 per thousand, that'd be 44.
About 3,600, probably. Yeah, around 3,600.
Around 3,600.
An average.
Okay. To get to 75.63 under the new structure requires 2,001 gallons, basically. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
You're absolutely right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
There. In terms of the other rate design, so moving from residential single family to the multifamily and commercial classes. So the left-hand side is your existing, the right-hand side table is the proposed. We've highlighted again the majority of the changes there. And so the multifamily class again is currently charged per unit. It will continue to be charged per unit. But however, there, again, we're trying to get closer to that existing minimum. So right below the left-hand table, we have calculated existing minimum charges for the multifamily, commercial 1 and commercial 2. So those are the minimum charges. We've tried to get fairly close in terms of the 2023 proposal with them close to those minimum charges in terms of the fixed charges. Multifamily, what you'll see there is it's a little slightly lower because if you recall cost of service, the multifamily was at 12% from the cost of service rather than 19%. So we're actually doing a bit of a reduction on the multifamily class to get them more in line with cost of service. Commercial 1 and 2 slightly higher than the minimums because again, they needed to go up higher than the overall 19% average. When we look at the flow charges, we have eliminated multifamily flow charge. So again, this is just going to be a flat rate per unit. Commercial 1 will maintain the tiered rate structure at the 0 to 6,000 over 6,000, again, with being something to address in the future. And then again, the commercial 2 class is all flow at a flat rate rather than having the 2 tiers, simply because 92% of those customers were hitting tier 2 in the first place. And again, here on slide 18, we're just summarizing, bringing all of the single family, multifamily, and commercial classes together. Existing current rates on the left-hand side, the proposed changes that we just discussed on the right-hand side, just so we can see it all together.
As far as the commercial class 2 grease customers, is that, who should we, are we thinking of, I mean, obviously it's restaurants and food manufacturers. Are there other users in that category that I'm not thinking of?
Mr. Mayor, Council, the one of the exercises that we went through was to look at those. We have 4 or 5 pages of these classifications. And me in particular, I went through each one of them, and that's exactly what I was looking at was, and grease relates back to, the initial use. And so it's usually food processing. It may include a gas station or a Jiffy Lube kind of thing, but for the most part, it's restaurant related. And the charges, it's hard to tell. And you can see how we're kind of shifting back and forth between grease and non-grease. That's kind of a legacy category from way back. And we talked about getting away from that entirely. And I know Angie's already addressed that a little bit. Because back in the beginning, we were looking at strength and it was BOD and TSS, and so here we're looking at grease, non-grease. The best I can recollect or conceive in my mind is why we called it grease and non-grease was the burden it put on the mostly the collection line right downstream of that. We had certain spots that we visit often because the grease will coagulate downstream, and then we have to go back out and maintain it more often than we would the rest of the system. I know I'm answering a little bit more than the question you asked, but those are, I think, where these legacy categories came from. I don't think we can really pinpoint exactly, and then ultimately, as Angie put it, we'd like to phase these out. And maybe in another iteration, we'll move more towards BOD and TSS as an example. Now, and then we kind of, a good example in my head is, our major industry in town, is Lighthouse. And I know we're not supposed to use names, but we have a major industry that produces, good products related to cheese and dressing. Those are high in BOD and TSS, by the way. And, but would also fall into these categories, these commercial 1, commercial 2, as an example. But the point I want to make is we have an agreement with them also. So major large users, we would sit down and work all this out, both on the sewer and the water side. And I know I have some homework to do with this industry in particular because they want to ask questions about the use of the water itself. A lot of the water goes into the product and doesn't even make it to the sewer. And yet this is one of our assumptions is that what goes to the water meter must be going down the sewer. And that's what all our winter averaging is about, by the way. Stuff we use in the winter doesn't have any irrigation, so it must be going down the sewer, and therefore that's the nexus in the relationship to the sewer charges. So the point there is major large users, we would want to negotiate exactly their effect on the treatment plant in particular. And we may require also then them to have pre-treatment as well. Treatment at the site before it even gets to the sewer, because it's too high in strength or too difficult downstream to handle.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I,
Yeah.
a question here for you? I noticed the commercial class 2, the grease, it looks like there's only 53 users out of that. I'm guessing that's mostly food processing and restaurants. Do we have any idea how many restaurants actually own their buildings? And the reason I ask is because that would typically, I would guess that it's very few, right? The majority of them actually rent from a landlord. And typically in those rents, the landlord is only liable for the 4 walls, the floor and the roof, which would be a straight pass through to the restaurants. And I think when we start talking very much like we did with the water rate, we have some unintended negative consequences that come up with our community that not only are these prices raising, but I would imagine your local grocery store is also a commercial class 2 grease as well. I think that's safe to say. And might that, as we, I appreciate that you've talked about negotiating with some of your larger customers as well. But not only would these prices be going up, but maybe your restaurant prices would be going up, or your local grocery store prices would be going up in terms of playing around with the sewer rates and the water rates, similar to our irrigation users from our water study, right? Which I believe is our school that doesn't necessarily, even though they're not paying their fair share, if we don't have these conversations with them ahead of time, certainly the school has not budgeted for a giant water hike in terms of irrigating and watering their fields, nor have the supermarkets or the restaurants or the customers that purchase from these places.
Mr. Mayor, there's Councilman Dick, there's several questions embedded in there. And I'll have to, defer to both Angie and I continue to forget my other major partners in this are Sarah and Jennifer. And it turns into which is a great group to have around the table because each of them then can contribute. I remember Jennifer in particular looking at the list and knowing exactly what the uses were as an example, whereas I'm new here, I wouldn't recognize some of the names. Some of them are LLCs, and just as you were saying, a lot of rental tenant relationships as an example. And so in going through the list, we erred on the side of, if you're on that list and it wasn't obvious, that you should or shouldn't be on the list, then it remained the same. So there's a lot more homework that needs to go into that particular portion of it. And you brought up another point, which is a good one, is it's not only restaurants, but there are grocery stores that process food and, and baked goods, et cetera, and therefore have the same effect. There's cafeterias, for instance, that are on that list, and the jail, may have, food processing, those kinds of things. That's kind of the category, but in general, if it's food processing, usually it's the grease, non-grease. The one question that you had in there as well, and then there's outreach and communication. I think that's an excellent point. And it starts with fundamentally, we saw, those classes being needed to be adjusted in the cost of service, what the model is showing us and how to adjust that. The outreach portion of that, as we've discussed it certainly as to how to speak to them, and like you said, not that great a number of customers, and therefore we should be able to reach out to them. These bills go out via email anyhow, and to the extent you read these bills, and that's the first line or front line of communication. But I don't know that we've developed any more communication beyond that. And like you, we wouldn't want to shock them either. And like you said, school districts in particular run by the same cycle we do and may not be able to shoulder that increase without knowing quite a bit in advance. So we have some work to do on that outreach in particular, but those are all points well taken. There was another one in there related to, again, there's several questions. One was this tenant relationship. And I'm gonna let Sarah just address this a little bit because we've had this discussion in all of the utilities related to notifying the owner of the facility as well as the tenant, because each of those have different agreements as to how you pay utilities and why you pay utilities. And who are you going to shock and who should know it and who's going to pay it? That's a big deal. And it's been part of these discussions over the past year in particular. So I'll let her speak to that a little bit. And then from the kind of the operational side of that, you got to imagine we have a pre-treatment program. We're required to have one by EPA, and that is to get out to those that discharge to the sewer that should be inspected, you know, for their effects on the sewer. Large users especially, but all the way down to restaurants in terms of, you know, have you, there's a grease trap under the sink, and then there can be a grease interceptor in the road. And then those need to be inspected and maintained. And so the owner and the tenant both need to know that, and those are important. If you don't maintain them, then more grease makes it down, as an example. And then finally, to go all the way back to another question related to conservation, Councilman Welker is on the conservation happens on the water side. So we still have those tiers in there, and there's incentive on the water side for conservation. The sewer itself, as an example, in a house, especially new building, new construction is going to have flow restrictors, et cetera, related to conservation. So even new building codes conserve water better now than ever before, but also conservation related to how we irrigate our lawns, et cetera. I know that's outside of that, but I got to thinking, you know, I think your question was, do we flush less? Well, first of all, you know, toilets have evolved over time, and it becomes a requirement for new construction, in particular for those low flush toilets and shower head restrictors as well, as an example. And so I got to thinking, well, who would just leave the water on and make it to the sewer? And so now you can see how or why we measure water in the winter as to what the sewer use is. And then Angie spoke to the efficacy of doing that versus the reasons not to do that and put all that into a fixed charge. Now, it's all averaged out in terms of their usage and what that fixed charge should be. You know, there's no precise science to that, but it sure makes it, it solves quite a few of the problems Angie was talking about. And then plus on our utility billing side of it, we're not winter averaging all these other accounts. You know, a couple thousand accounts every year. For what reason, quite frankly? It's not uncommon to have fixed charges in other cities and other utilities. So, you know, I mean, it's all part of the, it's all vetted in the methodology, and it's all legitimate. And so these are the reasons why we're changing it to these more on the fixed charge side in the both water and wastewater.
Thank you, Greg.
I think
Address a tenant.
I'd like that.
Currently, I can just give a little background. Currently, we actually bill tenants on the behalf of homeowners, residential, and then also commercial. That is something that I have brought up, I think, several times throughout this processes and looking at that. And I know that currently looking at drafting some policies around that, and that will be coming actually forward at the first meeting in April for you guys to address and to look and to decide. Because it does create on the financial end or the billing end of it, quite a bit of change. When you have somebody who's moving in, especially tenants, they change much more frequently than a homeowner does. For example, every time that happens, it's a new bill that has to be stopped, created. And I mean, it's a, so anyway, we're looking at that and we'll be bringing that forward for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So moving on to slide 19, here we're showing some of those impacts that we had mentioned. So when we're looking at the single family, for instance, on this particular slide, we wanted to provide the impacts from at various different usage. So you have a couple low and 1,000, 2,000 gallons, the average at 3,600 gallons, and then the medium and high, just to give you an idea of what would that current customer be paying today under the adopted rates of October 1st versus what do these changes look like in terms of the proposed changes for 2023. So changes in rate structure for some of them, changes in adjusting cost of service up or down for some of them. For the single family, again, the overall average was 19%. The cost of service target and the adjustments are about 16.2% for 2023. And so what you can see here is that by keeping that minimum charge equal to the fixed charge for the low users, the overall impact is no impact in terms of the 1,000 and 2,000. When you get to the 3,600, which is the average, essentially almost neutral there in terms of the 22 cents. When you get down up to the higher, the 6,000, the 8,000, that's when we can start seeing some of the decrease in terms of those rates, because now we're capping it at the fixed charge. This tends to balance out if you're looking at the combined bill with the water. If you recall, the water utility, the higher users were getting much higher impact, because again, the more you use, the more you're going to pay. So in that combined bill, you're actually kind of averaging out in terms of those larger users are seeing a higher water bill. Here you're seeing a lower sewer bill. And so the overall average is, we're probably going to look into the 2 to 5% in terms of the impact when you combine the water and the sewer together. When you're looking at the other classes, here we have multifamily as well as the commercial too. And again, these are the larger groups and the ones that may be impacted the most with the cost of service change. And so on the top table, again, is the multifamily. We did try to give a range of 4 units, 12 units, and 50 units, just to give an idea of what the impact would be there. Again, for multifamily, because of the cost of service, their overall rate adjustment was not the 90%, it was more than 12%. We're trying to get them down and more into the range of reasonableness for their cost of service class. And so that's why you're seeing some additional decreases there in terms of the multifamily class.
So those increases are captured in the 2023 existing?
The 19% was the 2023, yeah, across the board. And so the 2023, why it looks like a decrease again is it's changing that cost of service and then going flat rate. Commercial 2 here is again low 30,000, average 48,000, and then the high 100,000. Here, that particular customer class for cost of service needed to go to 30% versus the 19%. And so that's why you see some additional increases here compared to the existing 2023. You'd see the same on commercial 1. The impact is just a little bit lower because they were at 25% versus the 30%. We can come back and address some questions if you have them. So in summary, again, as we noted when we were talking about water as well as sewer, this is very highly data intense in terms of the cost of service. So not only to establish revenue requirements, but really digging in and identifying, what do your customer classes in the city look like? How do they use? What are the facility requirements, et cetera? And so that's really what resulted from this particular study process. For the sewer utility in particular, what we're looking at in terms of cost of service adjustments is it looked like the single family and multifamily customer could come down a bit from that overall cost of service and where we had them. The commercial classes actually looked like they needed to increase slightly higher than the average in order for that cost of service. Rate design, again, here, what we're looking at is moving the residential customer class, single family class to 2 categories, flat rates, usage less than 2,000, and then use more than 2,000. Again, ultimately by 2028, we would like to have that as 1 rate schedule for the single family class. But again, just slowly trying to get them there over time so that we're minimizing impacts.
And so that would look something like a median between the 2 rates that we're seeing?
Yeah, they'll start merging towards each other. Yes.
Okay.
In terms of the multifamily class, again, there we're going to eliminate the volume charge and strictly just charge for the flat rate per unit. And then we're going to propose eliminating the billed minimum usage for all classes and just keep it at the flat rate or the flat rate plus the usage. And then eliminate the tiers for commercial 2, grease. Again, what we'll be looking there is looking and studying in terms of the future commercial 1 to try to eliminate likely those tiers. But again, just due to the impacts, we wanted to be careful with that particular customer class at this time. And so with that, again, we appreciate the questions. We would entertain some additional feedback and input in terms of what we have presented this evening. What it looks like in terms of public hearing, and Sarah could probably talk about this a little bit more than I, but it looks like the rate adjustment is set for April 5th with the effective dates, if approved, going into effect for the May 2023 billing period.
Thank you, Angie. Appreciate that presentation. Council, questions or comments? All good. I have to say, I'm still having a hard time giving up on the incentivized charges. Because I feel like while we still have retained them to some degree with the water, there was a bit of a reduction in the incentive structure with water. And so eliminating them for sewer entirely feels like we've, really made a big change there. And while I see the value of that, it's just, I just, it seems like, again, it's the same argument, right? We should, I've always been of the belief that we should be encouraging conservation and reflect that in our rate structure. So I'm personally struggling with that a little bit. I'm curious to hear what council's thoughts on it are. And I guess I wonder, really the only argument that I heard against it was, and maybe I missed something, but that we have, that we can count on the revenues, right? That we get, but I think we also know how much use is happening out there, and so we can all, just as we have, right? We can project these things, and we can project what kind of revenues we're going to get based on the usages that we see today and what we've seen historically. And so I have a hard time buying that argument. And am I missing something?
From my standpoint on the billing side, and then just all the, I've got a list of things. So I only said one, but the other list of things that we have is that winter averaging accuracy is very difficult. Because you're taking one person to go through all those accounts to do that averaging, and it just opens up for error. Not saying that happens, but I'm just saying it opened that up.
And I heard that particularly with the winter, with the second homeowners that are not here in the winter. I can imagine how that's, we're making a serious miscalculation there, given the way that we've been, calculating those to date, right?
And not only that, but new users coming onto the system don't have a history or a winter average, so they automatically go on with the minimum. So that also, they have a whole year of paying, not use what they're actually using. Consistent, predictable revenue, we already talked about that. Their customer understanding of winter averaging is difficult to explain sometimes. And then also too, when you do explain it, then they get, if I don't use a lot of water during these 3 months, then I won't have to pay a lot. So they actually do see, can see some conservation because of that, if that's the right way to say it. So I guess that's just a few of the things that we've discussed. And it was a big discussion. We went through many iterations of this, and it was a lot of talking back and forth of, do we really want to present this? And I think ultimately, when we started looking at other jurisdictions that have done this, and talking with Greg, who has actually had has been in other jurisdictions as well, that this is common. It's not uncommon to have this type of structure. So that's what ultimately why we were like, okay, let's present this. We think that that's actually a good structure.
Okay. And Angie, from your perspective, and I know you do a lot of these, have you seen a change in sort of the best practice across the industry over recent time? Is there a movement towards the fixed rate, or is this everybody's kind of done it both ways for a long time?
And that's an interesting question, because I was thinking about that earlier today. I would say probably 5 years ago, maybe, there was definitely a movement from moving from the fixed to the volume charges. I think what people quickly realized is the revenue stability they didn't like to give up on, in terms of, having these fixed charges, which a lot of your utility systems are fairly fixed in terms of the costs. They did see some revenue, volatility in terms of those particular, charges, that once you're relying on volume, then, you're more subject to that variability. And so it halted a little bit, I would say, in terms of the movement that we were definitely seeing. I mean, we were getting calls very commonly to say, hey, let's try to get a, volume-based rate on the sewer. That just happened to be where the industry was going. But I'd say that's paused a little bit, and we're still seeing the majority of customers on the sewer side for a single family charge a flat rate. But absolutely, there are people who are charging the volume rate as well.
Go ahead.
I'll share some thoughts.
Yeah.
Angie, I imagine if we were a community in a different environment or ecosystem, let's say like the Colorado River Basin, we would have a very different proposed rate structure that reflects more heavily the value of conservation. I can't help but realize that we're, next to the largest lake in the Pacific Northwest. We've got, for all intents and purposes, a relatively infinite supply of drinking water here. Is that part of the consideration when designing rate structures for a community like ours, where conservation of water compared to revenue stability is just a little bit less important, because we're trying to do big, important infrastructure improvements here. Revenue stability seems like a really important value right now, whereas droughts happen, of course, but we still have the biggest lake in the Northwest. Literally, it's where we get our water from. So is that something that goes into these calculations? If you were working for a community of our size in a more arid climate without, a large drinking water supply, I imagine volume charges would be more likely, an important element
Sure.
of the rate structure.
And absolutely, we always say the rate design is more art than it is science, because it definitely takes into account not only what is the cost basis of this, but also what are the goals and objectives of the community. And what are you trying to accomplish? Is it revenue stability that's the higher priority? Is it conservation? And sometimes those two are competing forces. And so we really do have to sit, pause, and listen to say, well, really, what are you trying to accomplish? What's important to you at this particular time in terms of your rate structure and what you're trying to accomplish? Is it revenue stability? You are going to take on a lot of debt in terms of your plant. And so is that the priority today, or, is it conservation? That changes and evolves with communities as well. If we did a rate structure prioritization, I would have said, 10 years prior, conservation was number one. Now it's probably affordability and revenue stability. And so it evolves and changes with you. So it's not always going to stay constant, but that's what we're always trying to listen to our clients for is, what are you trying to accomplish? And let me give you ideas and options so that you can try to accomplish what you want. So it really it is about the community and your overall goals and objectives.
Does the industry have any estimate of like what the elasticity of demand for, sewer is for wastewater? For example, the idea of rates incentivizing conservation in the first place. If we had a volume charge model that was really aggressive, does the industry have any idea nationwide or regionally how responsive consumers might even be to the fact that they're, for the extra 1,000 gallons that they flush now, they're paying 30% more than they did before? My assumption is that people are almost totally unresponsive to those changes. I mean, I don't
Removed probably than the water, side. You kind of have more of that, nexus in people's minds when you're thinking about, price elasticity and cost and, leaving the faucet on, et cetera. When it gets to sewer, probably a little bit less in terms of, that nexus or in terms of people's minds. I don't know that off the top of my head. I'd be happy to, research that. There for sure is on the water side of price elasticity, a number of different studies on the water side. For sewer in particular, I'd have to dig in a little bit and ask some colleagues.
Yeah, I think Greg he kind of enlightened me by saying the conservation comes on the water side. And I hadn't really thought of that, but you can't flush water that you didn't get out of the tap in the first place. I guess you could, but it'd be really expensive.
Any other discussion? Okay. I appreciate that little debate. Thank you. And we're not going to have any public comment on this, so we'll just move right along. I would entertain a motion to schedule a public hearing for council's regular meeting on 2023. Take public testimony regarding proposed new wastewater fees and existing fees proposed to increase more than 5%. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Walker.
Yes.
Motion passes, and I would encourage everyone to attend the public hearing on April 5th to provide your feedback on the proposed new water and sewer rates. You are also welcome to submit written comment prior to that date. Any written comments received before March 31st will be included in the meeting packet for council consideration. Written comments can be emailed to cityclerk@sandpointidaho.com. This time I'll call for a brief recess and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay, next on the agenda is a public hearing regarding 2 parcels totaling approximately 4.67 acres at 1805, 1815, and 1950 North Boyer Avenue, Bonner County parcel IDs RPS 377-600-00001AA and RPS 008-200-3001AA, legally described as lots 1 and 2. And the east 25 feet of lots 7 and 8 in block 3 of Culver's addition and lots 1 and 2 of Samuelson Place plat, section 15, township 57, north range 2 west, records of Bonner County, Idaho. These parcels are located to the west of North Boyer Avenue, across from University Place subdivision and south of New Life Church. The request is to rezone these parcels from residential single family to residential to mixed use. Mixed use residential. A notice of public hearing was published in the Bonner County Daily Bee, the city's newspaper of record, on February 7th, 2023. Following a Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing on January 17th, 2023, the commission voted to recommend approval. I'll now recite the order and procedure for the public hearing. First, explanation of the subject of the public hearing by the city staff. Second, presentation by the applicant. Please note that council members should address their questions to the applicant at that time. Third, opening of the public hearing, at which time the public may provide testimony. The order of those providing testimony will be as follows. First, we'll speak those in favor. Second, those neutral. And third, those opposed. And the fourth order of procedure is the applicant's rebuttal testimony, at which time final questions may be asked of the applicant. Please note that if new facts are elicited during rebuttal, the public will be given an opportunity to comment on any new facts. Fifth, close the public hearing. And sixth, the council will deliberate. No new information may be provided after the hearing has been closed, with questions directed only to city staff during deliberation. For the record, any written comments received prior to agenda posting were included in the meeting packet or otherwise provided to council. Please note that the public hearing is for comments only. Do not address any questions to council or myself or to city staff. If council members have questions for the person testifying, they should ask those questions at the time of their testimony. For those participating on Zoom, you will need a working microphone on your phone or computer to speak. If you wish to speak in favor, are neutral, or opposed, I will call for testimony on each, and you will raise your hand on Zoom at that time. When your name is called, you will see a prompt on your screen asking whether you would like to unmute. You will then need to unmute yourself in order to be heard. Those here in chambers who would like to speak will need to complete a sign-up form available on the table by the door and hand it to the clerk in the front right of the room. Please state on your form whether you wish to speak in favor, are neutral, or opposed to the request. You will see those options on the form. Please do not approach the dais. If you have any written materials for council, please hand those to the city clerk. Those in attendance are not to disrupt this meeting or the business at hand that is being taken up by the council. Disruptive behavior includes clapping, disruptive noise, and comments or exclamations from the audience. Before we proceed, I'd like to ask for confirmation from each council member that you had no ex parte contact or conflict of interest as pertains to this request. None. Seeing none, I'll now yield the floor to City Planner Amy Tweet for an introduction and explanation of this request. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Again, this is a public hearing on a request to rezone 2 parcels totaling just under 5 acres from residential single family to mixed use residential, which is a commercial zoning district. The surrounding zoning is residential multiple family to the north and single family to the south and east. Again, the parcels are identified in red. The existing use of the property is primarily residential, as are the surrounding uses, surrounding adjacent uses. Residential and institutional, there are churches on either end of the property. The property is within the comprehensive plan context area 3B. That is a context area that envisions a mix of single, multiple family residential, along with neighborhood scale commercial with upper floor residential. The stated intent for the rezone is to develop the site with a combination of multiple family residential and neighborhood commercial. In the image, the orange structures are 2- and 3-story residential structures. And then the concept includes commercial along North Boyer Avenue. Should the rezoning be approved, the number of multiple family units would require a conditional use approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. In consideration of a rezoning request, the request would allow all uses allowed in the district, not just those that are being proposed. The request includes a conceptual plan only, and a rezoning agreement could be required to improve the consistency with the conceptual plan. And the rezoning must take into consideration the impact of the rezone on delivery of public services by any political subdivision. For a rezoning, the findings that must be made by City Council are whether or not the proposed zone change from residential single family to mixed use residential is in conformance with the future land use map and other policies within the comprehensive plan, and whether or not the mixed use residential zone is consistent and compatible with existing zoning and future land uses in the vicinity of the site. Following testimony and deliberation at its January 17th, 2023 hearing, the Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval of the rezoning. City Council may take one of the following actions on the request. Concur with the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission to approve the request. Approve the request with conditions to be incorporated into a development agreement. Deny the application or postpone consideration for no more than 40 days to consult with the Planning and Zoning Commission or staff. With that, that is the overview of the application.
Okay, does council have any questions for staff at this time?
Mr. Mayor, I did. So, the section of property that goes between the two lots, is that right of way or what?
It is a dedicated right of way.
Okay, and was that planned to be a street at some point or?
The discussion has been, first step would be rezone the property and potentially ask for a vacation of that right of way. And use that as the access to the north and south parcels.
Okay, but that would be another step. We're not dealing with that right now. Okay,
Correct.
I just
That-
wanted to be
that would
clear on
need
that.
to be a request to City Council.
Okay, and then just to clarify for me, when we're doing mixed use residential, those, anything built above 1 story would have residential above the commercial, is that correct? Isn't that how our ordinance is?
Mixed use residential upper floor must be residential, correct?
Okay, because in the plan there, the colored scheme that you showed, and
Right.
would, but that wouldn't be required I mean, they could build single story and then it would be just a commercial development.
Correct. What is proposed is just commercial, not a mix of commercial and residential along Boyer. So that's why I have it identified as commercial only.
Right, but this is again, just conceptual at this point,
Correct.
so, okay, right, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, next will be the applicant's presentation. As a reminder, council should address their questions to the applicant at the time of their presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, council members, mayor. My name is Jeremy Grimm, owner of Whiskey Rock Planning and Consulting, representing the Pearsons today on this zone change request. I'm just going to walk through sort of the vision for it and touch on some of the specifics. So first of all, CA 3B or mixed use residential. Just want to touch on where in the city this is located. It's denoted in the bright blue here. And this is in the comp plan map. You know, there's some up off of Woodland, over off of Pine, southwest of town along Division and bordering the downtown. And then right in the heart of town, there's this vision in the comp plan that everything around the University of Idaho would be mixed use residential. So what is it? The MUR mixed use residential per Sandpoint City Code 922. It accommodates a variety of uses, commercial zoning classification that permits rather than mandates, per your question, council member rule, a vertical mix of low intensity commercial and residential uses within the same building. Why? There's this concept of the 15-minute city. You've probably heard of it. But the thought is that if you can provide everyday services and amenities within 15 minutes of a walk or a bike of a neighborhood, then you can make those neighborhoods much more resilient and enjoyable for the residents. So when we look at that and compare that to where we have these MUR zones in the comp plan or the CA3B in the comp plan, you can see that they're spread out, and ideally, if you had a perfect plan, we would have these little nodes around town where people could get basic services. But it helps. It makes it socially and economically equitable. It reduces traffic throughout the town. If people are just going out to get a jug of milk or something or a 6-pack, it allows a lot more access for human-powered mobility and well-being and health. And it saves time for a lot of people, so they're not stuck in traffic and at lights. They can just run over to their neighborhood shop or meet at a coffee shop or grab a sandwich or something like that. So when we look at the purpose in the MUR zone, it talks about accommodating a mixed use of buildings. It encourages development that exhibits characteristics of pedestrian-oriented storefront styles and shops and streets. And again, it touches on that promotion of health and well-being to encourage physical activity and alternative transport modes. It also does provide that greater social and interconnectivity. Sometimes these 15-minute areas, you get to meet your neighbors, other than walking your dog or, you know, pulling your trash bin in. You can meet them for, you know, a neighborhood meeting or just meet some new friends. So how do we do this? The code right now, 92210, does restrict development in these MUR zones, specifically the commercial development. So we're not getting really large footprints. The footprints have to be less than 5,000 square feet per building. You're trying to build them closer to the street, so there's easy access and permeability between the street development. And all commercial floor space provided on the ground floor of a mixed-use building must have a minimum floor to height ratio of 12 feet. So if it's that mixed-use building, you're getting nice, tall ground floor windows and access. When we look at the comp plan, you know, it talks about future land use and it talks about facilitating the development of a long-range strategic growth pattern. And you're all familiar with that because that's what the comp plan is trying to guide you towards. And when we look at this area in the comp plan, right around the site, you know, it's CA3B, and it envisions mixed use as we talked about. It goes on to say these areas are typified by pedestrian focused activities, salons, coffee shops, restaurants, residentially scaled professional or institutional offices. And I guess, you know, as this area has developed, this is really the last opportunity for the infill there to get any kind of commercial or neighborhood mixed use development in this area, because everything else around it has pretty much been developed as straight residential. When we look at the community design, you know, in the comp plan, it speaks to addressing affordability by promoting mixed use development. And the residents recognize it as an important way to foster walkability and make efficient use of infrastructure, improve safety and personal convenience. That's sort of what we're trying to do here. Of course, the comp plan also talks about the influx of population stimulates reinvestment in these areas, creating exciting community centers where people can live, work, shop, meet, and mingle. So we're not talking about the downtown. We're talking about these sort of neighborhood commercial mixed use areas. So to review, there are limited areas in town for this kind of activity and development. It's not meant to compete with downtown. It provides low intensity neighborhood scaled services and businesses, promotes health, walkability, social interaction, reduces transportation demands, creates these centers where people can meet. There are some very strict design limits to ensure that the scale isn't disproportional to the neighborhood. And it's identified as desirable in specific areas, which this is one. In 2018, some of you are part of this, the city issued and created a community visioning report for the University of Idaho property. And in that, even though it wasn't an adopted document by the city council, it certainly discusses the priority for mixed use development along Boyer. And this is just an image from that visioning report. You can see how the buildings kind of come closer to Boyer. And if this is looking south, you've kind of already accomplished that with University Place on the east side of Boyer, and this is going to try to fill in on the west side. And in that sub-area vision, you know, it does talk about guidance for the comprehensive plan. It talks about framing Boyer Avenue, emphasizing its importance as a street, trail, and retail storefront corridor. It talks about new sub-district here with small-scale businesses and office and a streetscape that's rich with character. So that's really, again, what we're trying to accomplish here, looking at the goals. So when we look at the recent area development, you know, we've got, as I was alluding to before, we've got quite a bit of strictly residential all around the site, you know, probably closer to 370, maybe even 400 units. And it's missing that neighborhood center, which is potentially what we're talking about here along this Boyer frontage. And I do mention that, think of the trips of, you know, 350 homes, if they could just go across the street and grab a bottle of half and half or some eggs or something. So it's almost 5 acres in size, the two parcels that Mr. Pearson's acquired here. I think you're all pretty familiar with it. We did do a conceptual plan. This conceptual plan was just illustrative. And the primary reason for it is because as we go through this process, we're probably gonna have to do a trip generation and distribution letter or a traffic study. So we wanted to know what is the maximum density that could potentially go here so we could then figure out the trips. We also did some preliminary stormwater analysis based on this, but this is illustrative. There's no firm commitment exactly right now of what's going to happen here. This is the first of many steps, which I'll describe in just a minute. You know, there was some discussion of, you know, 3-level, 2-3-level townhomes and apartments. This is, of course, you'll recall, this is going up right behind the library on Cedar right now. Mr. Dom, so they could look like this, but a lot of this detail would come out in a further step. The storefront on Boyer could conceivably look something like this. Again, we just don't know. First, we need to get the zoning there before we spend more money on design and other applications. But the goals, efficient use of land, infill development, diversity of the housing stock, opportunity for neighborhood services and gathering places. Want to enrich the character of this corridor, add a more dynamic fabric to it, and follow the visions and goals and policies laid out by the citizens and the comp plan. So it's just the first step. The first is this rezone to mixed use residential. We would envision then moving forward with a combination application of a alley or street vacation with a revised site plan and that conditional use permit. So you have the assurance that, okay, this is what they're trying to do here. The reason we're not coming forward with all this right now, we're trying to do this as conservatively as possible because I can tell you to apply for a conditional use permit, you need elevations, designs, traffic studies, utilities, stormwater. So there's a lot of costs to put together a conditional use permit application. So I told Mr. Pearson, let's get the zone change first. If that succeeds, then you can spend your money on this other stuff. So it's much less risky for my clients to proceed this way. But that's what would come after is the street alley vacation, looking at all this other stuff and putting together a real firm plan for what's going to be designed here. Just to show you an alternative that they could proceed with right now, just a straight single family subdivision. I just kind of mirrored that those duplexes to the west and, potentially this is down at Maplewood here, just plop that in there. But I mean, you could get 32 single family units there right now with 32 ADUs. So you could have 64 units, probably looking at about 10 average daily trips per unit from a car. So you could have potentially 640 trips, with just a building permit and a subdivision without a zone change. So it's really doing something like this. It lacks the vision of the comprehensive plan. We wouldn't have any neighborhood services and all of those everyday needs would have to be met by jumping in a car, maybe some motivated people on a bike to drive down to Super One. But it doesn't also provide a whole lot of variety of housing choices. So closing comments, the rezone request, it seems to be in accord with the comprehensive plan and the community visioning from 2018. It'll allow for that vision to be realized. The single family zoning would likely allow for about 64 units without any commercial component and induced vehicle demand along Boyer. Sandpoint has traffic and park impact fees, which are designed to address the impacts of growth and to increase the capacity of our parks and roads. And just want to emphasize, this is the first step in a very long process that you'll hopefully see us before you in the future. Lots further design, study, and coordination with staff to make sure and inform that the future development meets the needs of the city. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions, certainly be happy to respond to them. And if not, I'll let you proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Appreciate that presentation, and I really appreciate the intent here to bring some commercial opportunities into this area, which, as you point out, is definitely envisioned in the comp plan, and I think it would be a great benefit to the neighborhood. So, council, any questions for the applicant?
I don't have any questions. Well, maybe. Hi. So I'm also a resident in those neighborhoods there. So, so two things. One, there's not much that I don't like about this idea. I think that the housing, you most likely will definitely build those houses. My concern is the attraction to having that bodega, having that market, to be able to go down into a neighborhood area, to be able to get that gallon of milk or a taco or sit down and have some friends there. So there's an element of concern for myself and tempering my rose-colored glasses of, I want to make sure that that commercial aspect of it does occur. I think that we've got one, and I'm sure staff will clear this up for me, that Milltown apartment maybe should have had commercial at that bottom floor. Maybe it was before my time, so maybe I'll get educated a little bit more here today. But with this, you have an opportunity to do a really good job here and be an example for maybe some other growth in that corridor, which has been visioned. We're going to following through with the things that we had said. So I would like to hear, and again, knowing that this is a very preliminary first step. And as a neighborhood resident, I like it. As a council person, yeah, we need houses and we want to do what it is that we said that we were going to do. Also, and then aside, I want to thank you for the conversation that you had at the planning and zoning meeting. The discussions that were made there were really helpful. That education on that legislative component about the impact fees for those political subdivisions, specifically the schools. I'm asking if there's something that you could educate me on, or this body, that we can help the legislators more help a community like us, because we do value public education. We do value schools. We do understand that this is going to have a traffic impact, and we want families to be there. We want nurses with families. We want teachers with families. Most families have more than one car. We are going to have more traffic. Along with that traffic, we want those kids to be, I want those kids to be in schools. That is not up for us to debate or decide. It sounds like you're very well educated in maybe conversations with the governor and whatever this body might be able to do to help with that, as well as help envision what is described here. So thank you for letting me have a couple extra minutes to thank you for your contribution.
You bet, Councilman Grote, and thanks for doing your homework. I got one question there and one comment. To the comment, yes, about impact fees, there are many efforts afoot to try to authorize impact fees for schools across the state. Idaho Business for Education, many others are working on that. I personally worn out the governor's ear about it. It's so important. So that is underfoot. But the other thing in terms of, what's going to get developed here, tomorrow I'll be presenting in front of about 700 people down in Spokane about the commercial and multifamily development in Bonner County. And by my count, come this August, between Ponderay and Sandpoint, we'll have about 600 new doors opening, like real apartments people can move in. On top of that, there's about another 500 that are either about to submit permits or in the entitlement and design process. It's like, 1,200 new apartments. It's a phenomenal amount of new residents in this community. It represents about 10% of all units available today. That doesn't even include the single family. It's just multifamily. So frankly, I've talked to my client, Mr. Pearson, about, when we first started this project, it was about a year ago. Multifamily looked like the target. I forecast that there's going to be, at least for a short term, a oversupply of multifamily. Prices will come down, and I've actually had discussions with Mr. Pearson about looking at more of a commercial component to this, rather and reducing some of the multifamily. In the long run, I think it's going to be great for Sandpoint. For 10 years, I sat here and people wanted to move here with their companies, and there was no housing. So now we're going to get a lot of housing, and the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to get a lot of industrial flex space, office space, and other retail and commercial space. So we finally have the housing on board that this community needs. So to answer your question, we're not sure where this is going to go in terms of what mix, but the first step is the rezone.
Thank you.
Council, any questions? For the applicant?
Mr. Mayor, I would agree with Andy and Jeremy. I think your advice to Mr. Pearson was on the spot. I was very excited to see a MUR rezone come through. I think I agree with you that this part of town desperately needs some commercial. So I'm very hopeful that if this moves forward, Mr. Pearson continues to follow this vision of commercial. And yeah, of course, the preference for multifamily over single family in this area where so many homes are being built in the single family zone. I think that's another welcome addition to the neighborhood. So yeah, MUR, I'm all about it. I wish there was more of it in Sandpoint. I think it fits very well with the vision of the comp plan here. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Mr. Mayor, I would also like to concur with both Counselor Welker and Grote here. One of the other things I like about MUR is there's a built-in patronage for your commercial that goes in there, as well as your residential around. Somebody's come from a city and lived in many multi-use residential. The savings that I got from walking to these places that were built next to our apartment complexes. There was many times where I wasn't too concerned with the climate at that point in time, but the savings of not having to spend gas to go out and to patronize somebody that these commercial developments are attractive for tenants to be able to come in there because you have so many people that live next to it, because you have the walkability, the bikeability, and you're not necessarily attracting those from downtown Sandpoint to drive there. Certainly a traffic study will be coming. Design standard limitations are there as well too. So I appreciate what you guys are doing here.
I'll just say it's nice to see all the effort that the people put into the updating the comp plan and had some of these things come through to make that vision happen. Excuse me.
Okay. Madam Clerk, we will now open the public hearing. Is there, each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. Madam Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak in the public hearing?
We'll give those online just a moment, Mr. Mayor. No one in the room has signed up. And I'm not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, that will conclude the public hearing. I'm assuming you don't want to rebut.
Nothing.
Okay. And I assume that the council is had all of their questions answered. There's nothing more that they would want to acquire from city staff.
I did have one question for city staff,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor. Amy, if you don't mind, what's the, obviously the wetlands, I saw the wetlands delineation. Does that status, is that of that part of the property being delineated as a wetland completely precluded from being integrated into any future development?
It depends on the quality of the wetland and whether they wanted to proceed with a wetland fill permit if they could. Obviously, it could be incorporated as open space for the development. But I think probably as they proceed further in the project, they would know more what they can and can't do with that property.
Okay, council, you've been provided with potential motions on the yellow paper in here that you all have on the dais. I would entertain a motion.
I can make the motion.
Please do.
All right, I move that the Sandpoint City Council, after consideration of the criteria and relevant standards of Idaho Code and Sandpoint City Code, approve the request by Pearson Homes and Viper Rental Ltd. For a zone change from residential single family to mixed use residential on the properties known as 1805, 1815, and 1915 North Boyer Avenue. Bonner County parcels RPS 0082003001AA and RPS 3776000001AA. And legally described as lots 1, 2, and the east 25 feet of lots 7 and 8 in block 3 of Culver's Addition and lots 1 and 2 of Samuelson Place Plats, section 15, township 57, North Range 2, records of Bonner County, Idaho. This motion is based on the findings that the proposed zone change to MRU is in conformance with the future land use map and other policies within the Sandpoint Comprehensive Plan. And the proposed MUR zone is consistent and compatible with existing zoning and future land uses in the vicinity of the site as submitted. Particular consideration has been given to the fact that the effects of this proposed zone change upon the delivery of services by any political subdivision providing public services within the planning jurisdiction. City staff has followed the notice procedures applicable to zone changes contained in Idaho Code Section 67, 6511 and Sandpoint City Code Title 9, Chapter 9.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Grote,
Yes.
Counselor Walker.
Yes.
Motion passes. Approval of an ordinance is required in order for the rezone to become effective. I'll now read the title of the ordinance as follows. An ordinance of the city of Sandpoint, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending the zoning classification of the property described in section 1 of the ordinance from residential single family to mixed use residential. Providing for amendment to the official zoning map to reflect this change, finding that the new zone is in accord with the Sandpoint Comprehensive Plan, providing that all prior zones applicable to lands described in section 1 are hereby superseded, and providing for publication and an effective date. I would entertain a motion that the ordinance pass its first reading by title only.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Walker,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Dick.
Yes.
The ordinance has passed its first reading by title only. I would entertain a motion that the rules requiring 3 separate readings, once in the ordinance's entirety, be suspended and that the ordinance pass its second and third reading under suspension of the rules. Is there a motion?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Walker.
Yes.
The motion passed and this ordinance number 1402 is considered read, passed, and adopted under suspension of the rules. All right, moving on. Following the public hearing, we will now return to old business with the treasurer's quarterly financial report for Q1 of fiscal year 2023. I'll now yield the floor to Finance Director Sarah Lentz.
Start off with just a quick reminder on where you can find financial information. And it has changed a little bit from our last platform, so I wanted to quickly go through that again. It is a full date now and with all the user neat things. So if you go on the main website, you click on that financial tab, it brings you to our transparency tab. In this overview, you scroll down. This is where you can get to the different funds here and get a quick snapshot of how it's going on. Even general fund. And it shows you what the current revenues and expenses are for the current year. I'm just going to dig in a little bit to show you where you can get more information. So down below, it does show you the different years, the budget to actual. These are, again, just a high overview. Let's go into expenses here and just breakdown. Now you are able to personalize this if you want. And under here, again, this is general fund up here, under by the department. You can then see, and we call them divisions / departments. Service areas. This is how this is by division. So you can see the public safety, all the different divisions within the city. I'm going to drill down into the public safety division, which is going to be the police and fire. And you can see the percent is to date. So 21% of the budget is used to date. And this is as of, so at the end of the month, when we have closed the month, we are uploading new financial data. So it normally happens when we're closing. Like January, we just closed, we uploaded that usually at the end of February. So it's about a month lag. So right now you're looking at the end of February. View that breakdown. Now you can see when you scroll down what that is made of. That's made of the police services and then the fire services. We do break down the fire services due to the JPA and needing to track them at a much deeper level for billing purposes. But you can see then what that is made of. And if you scroll down again, you're able to see again, year over year. I'm going to now dig down into the breakdown of the police services. Load. Scroll down. And here you can see, and what right now we're in, I want to move up here at the top here in 23 numbers. I'll scroll through the years just so you can see the differences right here. So you can see the salaries, the breakdown of what is made up of the police services. And going down here, you can see the budget to actuals for all those years for salary and wages. And you're again able to dig down even more. This will be the last dig dive, you go down. But you can actually break it down even farther to what this made up of all these. So I wanted to give a quick of how you can dig into this and see all the data. There is a lot in here. If you have any questions at all, feel free to call me or direct people to me. I can always answer how to do this. That is the data part of it. I want to also go into the checkbook part of this. And then show you, I'm just going to type in a Vista because that's the top of the list. And then we can say, I want to look at anything that's paid in the annual year of 2022. So I just go pick this one and then the end of the year. This will now drill down to everything that was paid to Avista Utilities. One thing that I do like about this is you can click this download checkbook and it literally gives you this in Excel. So people can look at it, manipulate it, do what they want with the data, which is a great, was not available in our last one. So that if you are a financial person, that is always where you like to actually play with the numbers. So that's a good feature of this. So anyway, that was a quick overview of that. I'll jump into. So with that change, I also did change my normal presentation that I have. Share that screen. Right. I just wanted to note, this is, again, you can drill down into details in that other, in the online portal thing that we have here. I noted that for our regular expenditures, they are, if you look fund by fund, they are not consistent with the 25% spent across the for the amount of the first quarter. However, that is due to the nature of all of our funds. They have a lot going on. Some have projects that are going on in the summertime that will be in the summer of the fiscal year 23. So again, a reminder that the first quarter is very low in revenues and expenditures due to that fact. I did want to show though that general fund all expenses trending compared to prior years. What this is the comparison to the budget. So it's showing a percent, and what you want to see here is that in the first quarter, our blue line is just consistent from prior years. So that doesn't, I mean, if you saw us going way up in the first quarter, that would be a question of like, why, what happened here? Again, we're looking good. Wages and benefits, trending consistent to last year, actually all the prior last year's. Maintenance and operations down a little bit, but that's again due to the nature of just the beginning of the year. The revenues, like to note, property taxes come in January and July, the big influxes. So very little of that is collected in the first quarter. You'll see that big collection in the second quarter. And then also with the business state shared revenues, state and local shared revenues, the majority of that comes in throughout in quarterly payments, which that first quarter comes in January. So that, nothing, very little has been collected in those two areas either. Business licenses are for the majority of it's billed out in the first quarter. So that's the majority of it actually is already collected, and the remaining amount is collected normally in January. So that's why that one's a little higher. Investment earnings. If you have your own personal money, you've noticed that the rates have finally turned around. We always budget this low every year and with anticipation that things will not be higher. They have turned around, so we are earning quite a bit more money than we have in the past, or what we have budgeted. So that's looking positive for the beginning. Nothing to note though unusual in that. Again, this is just the revenue trending compared to prior years, right on par, the percentage. And then I'll just show quickly the revenue trending for water fund, right on par. The expenditure trending, that is a little down. That is last year we had some of the capital projects were actually done in the first quarter. Just a few of the of the capital projects that threw last year up a little bit, but compared to prior years, the expenditures are right on par. sewer, wastewater fund, revenues are a little high. That is a 19% increase that we put in. So that's an immediate jump that you see. You will see this actually all year going higher than the prior years. And for years, you'll probably see this actually climbing year over year. Oop, wrong way. And then expenditure for wastewater, again, same thing. It's a little higher than last year, but not anything to note. Last one is the resort city tax, the 7%. So up through the end of the fiscal year, or I should say through the first quarter of this fiscal year 23 was still the 7%. The 14% goes into effect for the second quarter. So this is right on par for what we have collected in the prior year. You'll see that a little bit more than last year, but right on par. You will see a jump, and we did a good note is that we do all of the people who did remit and collect the 14% so far that we've collected. So we have not had a compliance issue in that area. So that's good to know. Other than that, that's unless you have specific questions, like I said, feel free to reach out at any time.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Council, any questions? No. All right. Appreciate that presentation. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter, Madam Clerk?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Moving on, for the final item under old business, we'll have an update on development activity and status of the comprehensive plan. I'll now yield the floor to City Planner Amy Tweeden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Christine and I were here, I think, early October to give an update. So we just wanted to give an update year-end construction and development. And first, an overview of building permits year after year. And Christine can probably explain a little bit more about the permits issued.
Sure. So you can see that we're still experiencing an increase in volume of permits overall. For last year, that third quarter is kind of out of proportion large, and the fourth quarter is kind of compressed, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we had a really increased volume of applications just prior to a rate change, because the application date establishes the rates that will be assessed against the permits. So that our third quarter looked really huge, a little bit artificially. And the trend right now is really dropping off in single family. In that fourth quarter, we had a number of permits that were ready to issue that we expected to issue, but the builders are kind of being cautious with the single family developments. So we have a couple of subdivisions that are not pulling permits for new single family residential construction. They're just kind of on hold, just taking a pause to see the direction that things are going. Whereas multifamily we're having the exact opposite experience. Multifamily is really heating up. We've issued a lot of permits for new multifamily development that we're starting to see, it was almost 2 years ago, we issued the permits for Samuelson up just north of the airport. And then it just sort of sat there for a while, but now all of our multifamily developments are really taken off. And then what's one other notable thing that Amy and I observed when we were looking at the numbers was that the ADUs are already taken up a pretty good percentage of the new residential permits, which is really exciting. The ADUs that were issued last year are sort of an even across the board combination of conversion of existing structures, like maybe of a detached garage, and new detached ADUs. And then also some new single-family houses that have ADUs built into them. So a really big variety of the use of that ADU.
And also this slide was just to explain, there were 88, or there were fewer than 88 permits issued, but it was for 88 units. But those 88 units, obviously, they may get built in a year or two, but the number of houses that were actually occupied was 43. So there were 43 new dwellings occupied in 2022.
And that's single family and multifamily?
I believe so.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure that any of our multifamily are represented in this, because this is only through December of last year. We have, like last year, there was a lot of construction going on, the new building at Fifth and Cedar, the new building on Pine Street, Seasons, of course, but those are all just coming up to getting their certificates of occupancy, we expect in the first quarter of this year.
Okay.
So they're not represented in that number.
Gotcha.
And then on the planning and zoning side, year end 2022 was really busy. It wasn't my imagination, it was. But it also, looking at earlier years is probably deceptive, because I think we've started tracking more things. So when we hold a pre-application meeting, we count that as an application. So we're just, and that pre-application may take a year before there's an actual application filed, may take another year before it's constructed. But these, between the pre-application subdivisions, conditional use permits, rezones, those are all the activities considered planning and zoning applications. And then just to, I realize the map is, the numbers on the map are a little hard to read, but this is representing where all the new developments are occurring. So we currently have 8 single-family subdivisions active, either actively permitting or ready to be permitted. So Madison Meadows and Boyer Meadows both have their final plats approved, they're recorded. We just haven't seen any building permits issued yet for those subdivisions, but they are ready to go. We have 1 cottage development under review, and that is 5 units. And then, as Christine said, there are 3 multiple family developments under construction: the Ridge at Cedar, Homestead, and Samuelson. And then there are 2 that are complete and near an occupancy, which is Fifth and Cedar and Seasons. And then 4 pending developments, which is Milltown on North Boyer at 134 units, Lights Out at 102, Olive Avenue condominiums at 24, and Lofts at Cedar, I believe, also at 32.
Sorry, what is Lights Out? Where is?
Lights Out is on Ontario, so it is this. Yes,
Okay.
almost at Ontario Division.
Okay.
Right now, there's some big steel buildings on that lot, right
That's
across
the-
from the county offices, just.
Okay, so that's changing.
That's Kathy's project, isn't it?
No.
No,
But that's the
For the,
1 and 6.
It would be
so
with-
right across division from the county offices, there's a big. steel
behind Mountain
building
West Bank.
That right behind Mountain West Bank,
Oh,
so that
Huh.
the one closest to division is not Lights Out, that's owned by the county.
yeah,
And
yep.
is slated to become redeveloped
Yep,
soon.
yep.
But just behind that, there's more buildings.
Know exactly what you're talking about now, just right behind Life Care, or not.
Like-
So there's 2
for time.
developments
Like
going in all
behind
that vacant.
Babs,
Yep.
Pizza
Yep.
there.
Okay, I didn't realize that there was
Lights out,
stuff
interesting.
going.
Lights out. So at what stage is that lights out development right now?
The site plan has been approved. They need to do a subdivision. They have not issued any, or they have not filed for building permits. And there's a few, they're still working on a few items to come forward. But likely they want to divide off one of those. They're actually dividing the lot into 4 lots. And that was already part of a short plat, so they're gonna need to go through the full subdivision process for that.
What zoning district is that? Is that
That's the
multifamily?
Commercial C,
Commercial C, but it's a multifamily development
correct.
planned there. Any commercial components to it?
Thank you.
So that's kind of the overview of what has been going on, or, well, year on 2022, but back to when you see the planning and zoning numbers going up, that means in the next year or two, the workload is going to be falling on the building side.
Thank you for that presentation. Yeah.
What is Homestead, Amy? There was the Homestead development.
Is on US 2,
Oh, that's the one out by Ridley. Yeah,
right?
Yes.
It's
Okay.
currently. Where's my-
Gotcha.
In Ridley and Park Place.
Right, and here.
Another question, Amy, you said the new permits for single family construction are on hold. I see, University Park Place or University Place seems to have halted construction of new homes on the northern portion there. What are the obligations with developers for continuing with the installation of infrastructure when they decide to pause the actual building of homes? The final plat for one of the phases, I don't think we've even seen yet, even though that's now over 2 years out from preliminary approval. What's the time frame for submitting a final plat application in those developments?
Well, it would probably have been as part of the phasing of the development agreement for those phases, but all of this, phases that did final plat have their infrastructure in.
Thinking specifically of like the phase that's along Boyer right there, where there's just mounds of dirt from the excavation that took place for the infrastructure east of there. Is there any hope that that will be developed in the next, or is that just totally up to the discretion of the developer at this point?
Amanda might be more familiar with the timing on that one, but we have not been approached about a final plan for that area, that I know.
Mr. Mayor, would you like?
Yeah,
me to
please.
respond? My understanding is that their engineer of record is working on final infrastructure plans and that we should see an application for that here in the coming months.
Okay.
For phase 3, the right-of-way improvements along Boyer are actually for this summer. Request that they not complete them immediately in advance of winter coming.
Any further questions, council?
Just a quick one. As far as when they're working the land like that and they don't have a section platted, do we have any ordinances around how long they can leave that property and less beautified, shall we say? I mean, I know we have like weed ordinances and everything else for the city residents, but do we have any kind of ordinance that sort of protects the people that have moved into that newer subdivision developing for, let's say the builder pulls out, and 10 years later, there's just a big mound of dirt?
My sense is it depends. We do have ordinances around nuisances. It depends on what that nuisance is. I don't believe amount of dirt qualifies as that, right?
I guess it depends on how big, or if it's going to turn back into a mountain. And then one quick question for Amy, again, off Ontario, south of where all the new stuff and south of the metal buildings where the county's involved. I know they took down all that, they logged that area, and I know that there's been a lot kind of on and off with that property, or is there anything going on with that particular piece at this point?
We haven't heard on that for several months. There
Okay.
was a subdivision proposed, the Turnstone.
Mhm.
And there were several changes that needed to be made.
Yeah.
And we haven't heard from the property owner or his representatives.
Okay, because it's sort of
Probably
semi-wetland.
6 to 9 months, I'd say.
Yeah, it's kind of a sinkhole over there, so I'm sure that developing there is complex. So I was just curious, so, okay, thank you.
Okay, Madam Clerk, is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right, moving on. The final item on the agenda, council would. Yes.
I have one more item.
Oh, my apologies.
Comprehensive plan
Oh, yeah.
update,
Yeah,
because it's been a long time. Here we go. I believe the last update I provided to council was potentially April of last year. And at that time, we were just discussing bringing, re-engaging Logan Simpson. So progress has been moving forward with the Planning and Zoning Commission. Again, I believe this was a graphic that we reviewed back in probably April. It's been modified over time. We actually recently needed to extend the Logan Simpson contract because it was going to expire yesterday, I guess. So we have extended that to complete that phase 3 of community plan. And as noted, the Planning Commission has been reviewing the chapters. Again, we started with affirming the vision and doing a survey to make sure that the visioning that had occurred early in the process was still valid, because there was that pause. Then when we got to the housing and neighborhoods chapter, we did the workshops, and due to poor attendance in that, we did the follow-up survey. And then also occurring was the Leland report that was providing the economic and housing data. So that's been incorporated. So that's all been ongoing. And the Planning and Zoning Commission has been reviewing chapters at all of their meetings. So they've gotten through all of the chapters. For the most part, there are components of land use and growth, including the area of city impact, that still will need to be addressed. And in the implementation chapter, what I'm working with Logan Simpson on, and we'll be working with staff on going through all the goals and objectives and coming up with actual implementation items that will be incorporated actually into an appendix to the plan, because the plan is already getting lengthy. So we're hoping through March that the goal is to get a draft of the document combined, get all the chapters that have been reviewed combined, and do a workshop with the Planning and Zoning Commission on the combined document. We'd also like to do a workshop with City Council, which we have not yet scheduled, and I know your agenda coming forward or always is very busy, so we'll be trying to get that on an agenda. And then we will also do a public workshop on the draft document. This is all with, and again, I had initially said our goal was spring completion, spring of 2023, which technically goes through almost the end of June. So that's how far we will get it done before summer solstice. That is my true goal. This is the on the city website, the information provided on the plan. We have uploaded a summary of the vision survey that we did, as well as the survey on housing and neighborhoods. And there's also at the top, there's the introduction, then there's also a tab for the draft chapters. The chapters that have been reviewed by the commission are all uploaded in their current format. But again, those are still going through revisions, but these have gone through at least one or two versions at the Planning and Zoning Commission level. So that is the status, and as I said, the goal of completion in spring is still
Eminent.
in sight.
Yes.
And I am going to do everything I can that we can complete it, because the plan is the first step to getting a lot of other things done, and working on codes and policies.
Can you explain again how we can access those draft chapters on the website?
Yes, so if you go to the city website. Hang on, let's go. And there's two ways you can go to master plans. And there is the comprehensive plan update,
Gotcha.
and then there's two tabs at the top, introduction, which has, will also take you to other previous documents,
Okay,
engagement documents as well.
thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right, anything more?
No, that's all.
Okay. Council, any questions about the comp plan update?
Mr. Mayor, no questions, but a big thank you. So it wasn't that long ago that I recall hearing from our public comp plan, look at code, all of this stuff, this robust workload that needs to be done quickly and thoroughly. Thank you to staff. Big thank you to planning and zoning. That was a very large chunk, and they've been doing a very effective job, which I know that we have another seat filled. I don't know if it's completely filled, but their workload has been considerable. And thank you to you and the rest of your staff and the planning and zoning commissioners. I look forward to summer solstice.
Okay, Madam Clerk, is there anyone that would like to comment on this matter?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right, that concludes that series of agenda items. Now let's buy a sweeper. The final item on our agenda, council will consider approving the purchase of a street sweeper, and I will now yield the floor to Infrastructure Development Services Manager Amanda Wilson. Bring it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief. Majority of the information was in your packet. I know you all have reviewed, but I wanted to take a quick opportunity to show this picture.
You should have brought up the room.
The request, as the mayor mentioned, is considering approval of an expenditure in the total amount of $174,400 as a purchase the sweeper from House Machinery. That's for a 2021 info, that's the actual sweeper itself, which is also on a 2022 rate line. So this is our current 2002 20-year-old sweeper that we purchased. To the best of my knowledge, this first sweeper that the city has owned. We still have it. It still somewhat operates today, but it is definitely hanging on by a shoestring.
How long have we had it, roughly?
We bought it in May of 2002. And then we in 2012 purchased a Timco sweeper, so 10 years ago. This is completely dead. We sent it off down to Spokane to a special mechanic to assess repairing it, and the quote was just over $50,000, and that was certain to resolve all of the issues. So it is beyond its useful life. And I really give huge kudos to our entire crew and especially our mechanic, Jason, who has literally poured his heart and soul into trying to keep this thing running as long as he possibly could. He's taken trainings on Timco. He's just spent endless hours trying to make the most of what we have.
Was it the truck or the sweeper that's?
So on the 2012 is actually the truck itself. That said, as my next slide notes, this year, as a result of the failures of our existing equipment, we rented a sweeper. And it was a nice day when one of our operators called me just to tell me how wonderful it was to drive a sweeper, that he didn't have to go down the same street 3 times just to get the debris and the dust.
It was like you swept.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it is both the engine as well as the sweeper. So we ended up keeping that rental throughout the season due to its failures, and ultimately this February issued a request for, not in February 2020, I'm sorry, that should say 2023. We issued a request for proposals to purchase an air sweeper. So while we had a rental, it was important that we publicly solicited to make sure that that was still the best price and the best deal. We opened that proposal up for both new and used pieces of equipment, and the proposal itself considered a variety of factors to improve cost, technical specs, apples, as well as lead time and the condition. The lead time, besides the rental that we currently have, the closest to that is about 12 to 14 months. So long lead item for most speakers. And we received 3 proposals, 2 of which were new, and then 1 is the used, but lightly used that we currently have on rent. So again, it's the total amount is $174,400. The funds are coming from the American Rescue Plan Act, so it'll be fully funded through that process. This purchase, while it is all used, does include warranties, various warranties and components of the sweeper, and it is immediately available, as in it is in our shop.
Whoa.
She is.
Nice.
I think it's
So we're buying the rental.
that is the request this evening.
Okay.
To purchase the rental.
Are there strings attached to those funds? I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Just the springs on the
Yeah.
sweeping part of the machine.
All right, council, any other questions? Madam Clerk, is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter?
No, Mr. Mayor.
I would entertain a motion to approve the purchase of the aforementioned 2021 Timco sweeper from PacWest Machinery. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes,
Counselor Walker.
Yes.
Motion passes and this meeting is adjourned.
disappointed there was no broom.